It seems like Russia is making its next big move with Putin giving this speech. So basically what Putin just said was that he's trying to move away from an economy where you are exchanging fiat, and it's going to matter much more what real goods you actually have, aka commodities, where the real wealth is, because he's saying that all these currencies are inflating at 8+% a year. So how would we continue to use them if they're literally just thought abstraction? So let's go to economy where we are actually exchanging goods for goods.
Absolutely. Josh, you've all heard Gammon say the measure of wealth is the goods and services produced in an economy. And if you look at Russia, you'll see that there's actually quite a lot of goods, raw commodities that Russia sits on for that. And I think what Putin's doing, and you've heard this said by others, is that we no longer want to participate in the paper fiat game, looking at you, COMEX and metals, but rather we want to simply be paid for in something that's real, something that's backed by a commodity. Now, whether that's gold, whether that's silver, whether that's platinum, whether that's timber, whether that's gas, etc., who cares? But the point is there's something real that's standing behind it. So the big picture here, I think, is that Putin is hinting that he is going to do whatever he can to transition the world away from the fiat system. So essentially the dollar-based system, at least the current, dollar 1.0 system that we're on right now, into a system that each country can have its own reserves backed by whatever it needs to be backed by. So, for example, let's just say Russia sits on a lot of natural gas. Let's say South Africa sits on a lot of gold. Let's say the United States sits on a lot of timber, or Canada, let's say, just sits on a lot of timber, for example. Well, each country would essentially use that to back whatever the unit of currency is. Now, this opens the door to, okay, well, how do you have a system that reconciles all this place? Because you still need a neutral unit of account. My argument is this is what XRP is custom designed for, but separate argument, let's not go there. Just as a thought experiment, you've got to have something to act as the intermediary, to act as like the way to change value between these various things in real time. The second thing I want to point out to you is that with Putin continuing to turn off the taps to Europe, I believe I read earlier today, Josh, or yesterday, Nord Stream 1, the major one of the major pipelines that sends gas from Russia to Europe, has now completely been shut off. So Europe's going to be in a very interesting position here coming up, because it's one thing if you have to pay through the nose for gas or energy, but it's quite another thing if you can't get energy at any price. And if you go back and look at Putin's speech, he specifically calls out hyperinflation, because if you create, it's like the same thing with the Fed or whatever. Any central bank, whether it's the Fed or the ECB, they can create more units of currency, but can't print more barrels of oil. We've talked about this before too. And so if you completely cut down the supply, you're not going to be able to buy it at any price, which is going to be incredibly inflationary. Now, the inflation is going to come in from the supply side or lack thereof. But nonetheless, this is going to be a major problem. My big picture is, and this is treading dangerously outside the macroeconomic space, is that I think Putin wants to develop the U.S. has the Monroe Doctrine for over here, and Josh, we talked about this the other day. I think he wants a Monroe Doctrine, or Russia's version of the Monroe Doctrine, but for Eurasia. And if he can bring Western Europe to its knees, if he can dismantle NATO, if he can draw in Turkey and the other, let's say, countries in the Mediterranean, at least to the Suez Canal and to the Russian sphere of influence, yeah, Putin might have a play for it. It's a long shot, but yeah, it might be there. Anyways, Josh.
Instantly, the first reaction people are going to have is, no way, Putin is bad. We could never let him do anything like that. That is completely impossible. And in fact, you are a Putin lover if you are even mentioning these kinds of things. No, we are simply looking at what he is saying. He is not mumbling over his words like our current president and just calling out his own citizens, saying that they are the enemy of the state. I mean, he is just saying the world as it is and what he is trying to transition to. And if you are not watching, then you will be left behind. So what could this actually mean? I mean, with Nord Stream 1 being shut down, Europe seems to be in a complete frenzy right now. I have not been there and I have no boots on the ground info, but from what I can see in prices, it is insane. The increases in that, those trends are only going to continue. He basically said, drop the sanctions and we'll turn back on Nord Stream 1. So this is going to come down to Europe. And when will the people demand that the cost does not outweigh the benefit of banning Russian kids from playing sports? It's utterly nonsense. Let's just do a compare and contraction here for what the sanctions are actually accomplishing. For the Russian sanctions that all the Western nations are placing on them, their Russian kids are not able to go to schools. Their Russian kids are not able to play hockey.
So Josh, as far as sanctions go, Europe really has to answer this question. They have to have a come to Jesus moment and realize, hey, listen, the way we view the world, it's actually not the correct way of viewing the world at all. And it's a really hard thing to do, because if you're having to change something that's so base, if you're having to change lenses on this front, it's not easy to do. There's a quote from a video game I really like. Mind views truth, And the truth that it derives is based upon the layers of belief that form the foundation for the truth that it sees. Changing these foundational layers is very hard. And like literally, people would rather die than admit they were wrong or have to go through the process of changing it. It's not easy to do, and it's certainly hard for me to do, and undoubtedly harder for others. But the point is that Western Europe has been living in a fantasy land. Arguably, you could say since the end of the Cold War, but more specifically, let's say since 2008. And sooner or later, the Western Europeans are going to have to wake up and realize, like, listen, there are bigger things in the world to worry about than carbon emissions. There are bigger things in the world to worry about, like our physical security, than virtue signaling and looking good and showing the rest of the world how progressive we are. My suspicion is from all of this, as I'm fond of saying, is that I think Putin's making a play for Western Europe to basically bring it into the Russian sphere of influence. So that's a long shot, but we'll see what's going on right now.
So what's the macro play here? And what I think is actually really interesting is, a lot of people are saying, so Europe is messed up. Everyone, that's going to be very contained, though, because everyone knows that contagion is not a thing. I wildly disagree with those notions. If a lot of European businesses start to go bust, it's just a matter of time until one of those banks starts to take a hit on their loans and they kind of get shut out the Eurodollar system. And what happens then? All the business that bank does with everyone else is going to have to kind of start to look over with their pants down and kind of do a check mechanism. And I think we could see some real contagion across the world, and especially in the US, because everything is so ridiculously intertwined. You have no clue how Russia shutting off its gas is going to lead to a European bank going bust because people fail to pay their loans, and then that European bank being intertwined with a US bank, which kind of disrupts the entire Eurodollar system and just causes a GFC 2.0 event. But it does not have to start in the US, and I actually don't think it will. I think it will start somewhere offshore, and with this going on in Europe right now, I think that is the most likely outcome. And it seems like Asia is trying to compete with who's the worst currency right now, the Japanese versus the euro.
Yeah. So, Josh, I think there are two potential vectors where it could start. And the first one is on the periphery of the system. So you have a Sri Lanka event or like a Cypriot event, although we already had that, but something on the periphery of the system that then spills into something that's slightly less on the periphery, and then slowly the dominoes start falling inwards. The other way I could see it happening is that if you have runaway energy prices, for example, something is no bid, then all of a sudden, this is where you have the real world of commodities meeting the fake world of like paper trading. So in the US, if you're familiar with the metals, you could think like COMEX, like, running dry, where basically COMEX just declares force majeure and cash settles, basically saying we don't have the gold, we don't have the silver, we don't have the whatever to deliver. But in Europe, if you have something like this happening, where you, let's say, have some bank that signs some derivative contracts. So let's say you had some utility company, right? That hedge. And remember, the utility company in Europe, they're not trying to play any games. They're just simply trying to say, like, look, we need to make sure that we can like guarantee prices, even prices are going to be high. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to enter into a futures contract with, Bank Corp or European Bank Corp or whatever, right? But if something goes no bid, then that means that the liability of the bank, in order to deliver these things, are going to either blow up, because the utility company's like, listen, we don't actually want to be cash settled. We actually need gas or whatever the form of energy is to provide to our customers, because there's this huge demand and it's not going away. But if you have something where you have a commodity that goes no bid and it suddenly shoots up and then it blows up the margin of the counterparties, or even worse, if let's say one of those counterparties is a bank that's plugged into the banking system and suddenly other banks in, let's say, the European banking system no longer trust that bank, that is a huge potential vector for contagion to come in that front. And the problem is this front, all that the banks can do is just take a page from, let's say, the central bank's playbook and just extend credit. Okay, well, fine, we're not going to give you a margin call. We'll just let you go out and out and out and out and out. But again, if you throw infinity at zero, you still get zero. And if there's zero supply, it doesn't matter how many units of currency you create. And what's more, if you destroy the confidence in the system, at least with that one bank, then you also open the door to say, for other banks saying, oh, what else is going on here? And if banks only freeze up, then that's a huge problem. But again, all the centrals can do in this particular thing is just basically buy the bad debts and take them from the balance sheet of, the commercial banks, put on their own balance sheet. But that doesn't solve the underlying problem, because, you're creating more currency units by basically doing a fancy, asset swap in this regard. But it doesn't change the fact that people are still demanding delivery. It doesn't change the fact that people say, oh, listen, we don't want the cash, we don't want the euros, we don't want the yen. No, we actually want the gas because we're cold, it's dark, and if we are unable to heat our homes, we will freeze to death. So in that case, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your account. And this is where you see Putin talking about, the imaginary economy, the numbers, on a computer. meeting the real economy. And this also shows you wealth of an economy where you have, real goods and services, well, the goods in this case being the gas that Russia can export. So interesting times. That's I think the macro play. Now, how do you profit on that?
Well, I actually think both are playing out right now. You see the Sri Lanka type events continue, and I think those are going to start to exacerbate as the dollar just went above 110. And why is the dollar starting to go up? Well, because Europe is just getting demolished. So that's going to raise the dollar because everyone's saying, I want to get at the euro, I want to get at the yen. There's nothing really good going on. So I'd rather hold dollars. It's the safest, most liquid currency right now. Euro, dollar, milkshake, etc. So people are buying up dollars, and that's causing more damage on the other nations. And then it's just a matter of time until those nations start to feel more pressure, just exacerbating the problem until something big inevitably happens with how the world is going right now and how intertwined the derivatives market is across the entire global monetary system. So, I mean, everything is moving so extremely fast right now. And
and it's going to get faster. It's not just moving fast. It's speeding up. And I just pulled up the Dixie right now. It's at 109.57 in after hours here on the 7th of September. Yeah, and here's the other thing too. So forget commodities for a second, okay? Because like commodities you actually need or whatever. But if you're looking at euro dollar servicing, so you have debt that's denominated in dollars, that's going to be another interesting thing, and that's just further going to exacerbate the problem. So yeah, I would say, and this is why I said too, and not that this is really a macro thing. We talked about this on the other channel, but like people talk about, oh my God, it's going to get bad in the United States. Yeah, it's going to get bad in the United States. Of course, it's going to get bad. It's going to get bad everywhere. I just think it's going to get really worse, elsewhere. So I am quite comfortable.
Yeah, and bad can mean extreme pain, but I mean, I would much rather be in the US right now than Europe. That is, especially Western Europe at that. So with all this going on right now, what do you guys think of this entire situation? Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.